A short while back, I decided to make a terrarium for this tiny praying mantis, and 300 days later, the mantis, along with the ecosystem, has completely transformed. Before I can show you this amazing transformation, I need to take you back right to the start. I decided to start completely from scratch and built the tank myself from picture frame glass. I used a glass cutter to cut the glass to size, which is surprisingly easy to do once you get the hang of it. After sanding all the pieces down, it was time for the assembly. I applied the aquarium silicone first and then carefully placed on the glass. I left it for 24 hours to cure and then installed an egg crate separator in the back, which would be for the moss background later. I didn't want to cover the entire top as I wanted to allow for some ventilation. I installed a couple small panels of glass followed by some window screen mesh in the centre. With the lid done, all that's left was the door. I decided to create a silicone hinge as I've used it before and it always works really well. It's very smooth, extremely discreet, and to most people's surprise, it's really quite strong. With the tank complete, it was now time to start creating the terrarium. The first step was to create a drainage layer, followed by filling in some sphagnum moss throughout the background. I could then install the substrate barrier and pour the substrate on top. For the hardscape, I wanted to create a tree trunk style scape, and these cork bark branches were the perfect material to make that happen. I glued them in place to make them nice and sturdy and then added some more sphagnum moss on top of the substrate. To add even more detail and interest to the scape, I placed in some of these georocks. With the relatively simple hardscape complete, it was now time to start bringing the scape to life. I used fern moss to fill out the background and pinned it in place with some toothpicks. Next, I placed in some of these small bromeliads throughout the scape. I also added a few cuttings of this Hygrophila as I really liked the wild shape of its leaves. I planted some oak leaf creeping fig on the cork bark with the hope of it slowly climbing up the background. I then planted this small jewel orchid cutting in the centre of the scape, followed by a few other plants. After giving the terrarium a good spray down, I then added the first inhabitants. These tiny springtails would keep the ecosystem clean, healthy and thriving. At this point, the terrarium was complete and all that was left to do was to let it grow in before introducing the mantis. After 120 days, the plant growth exploded and the terrarium was thriving. One of the highlights had to be the jewel orchid that grew multiple new leaves, with each one getting bigger and bigger. Some of the other plants began to overgrow the tank, so some maintenance was in order. With that done, it was time to introduce the inhabitant that will call this terrarium home. This stunning, tiny creature is known as an orchid mantis due to its resemblance to a flowering orchid. It wasted no time jumping straight in and got on the hunt right away. To start, it's only eating fruit flies, but as it gets bigger, so does the size of its prey. With the mantis comfortable in its new home, let's fast forward 6 months and see how it's getting on. Here we are, current day, and this 300-day-old ecosystem is truly thriving. Now let's take a look at the apex predator of this ecosystem, Jewel the orchid mantis. I'm 90% sure it's a female due to her size, but feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. It's crazy how much she's grown, and it's almost unbelievable that she was once smaller than my fingernail. She's super healthy and seems to be thriving inside this setup. At the base of the terrarium, you can see her previous exoskeleton that she molted from a couple weeks ago. Whilst this can be removed, I like to leave it in there as it's a great food source for the springtails. She really is quite friendly and doesn't mind being held whatsoever. With that said, she's always eager to climb right back inside her home. Before showing you some really cool footage of her hunting down some prey, let me update you on some of the plants. The jewel orchid has continued to thrive, growing these stunning large leaves. However, it's definitely in need of a trim back as the stem is struggling to hold the weight of itself. When peering behind the Fittonia, you can see just how well the oak leaf creeping fig is doing. It's spread right throughout the tank and has even started growing on the glass. As for the fern moss background, it's doing unbelievably well and has even started growing through the mesh vent at the top. A short while ago, I added this locust to the terrarium and it's found its way right to the top of the tank. After the slightest bit of movement, the mantis clocks on and the hunt begins. Instead of charging her prey, she'll silently stalk it until she's close enough to strike. It's commonly thought that the reason the mantis sways is to mimic a leaf blowing in the wind, but that's not the case. Swaying backwards and forth helps the mantis gain accurate depth perception, which is essential as she has to know when the prey is in reach for her to strike. As she gets closer, she'll stop walking and begin a very slow lean. This deliberate slow lean, along with the mantis's remarkable camouflage, keeps the prey from realizing how much danger it's in until it's too late. Her raptorial legs filled with spikes and spines keep the locust pinned down as she quite literally eats it alive. As for what will be left of the locust, here's her previous meal, and as you can see, other than a few legs, there's really not much left. This truly is one of my favourite terrariums that I've made, and it's been such a joy to watch it evolve over the past 300 days. Although the lifespan of a praying mantis isn't long, they're so enjoyable and rewarding to keep. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, thank you for watching.